Welcome to the Way Forward Regenerative Conversation Podcast number 31, Aging with Purpose, a conversation with Richard Leider. I'm the producer, Jim Burke. Our podcasts explore the way forward and how we can shape our future as a society, our planet, and our personal journeys, especially as we navigate the later stages of life. Today's episode will resonate with anyone pondering the essence of aging with intention and vitality, whether for yourself or someone you know. We explore aging with a sense of purpose, transforming our later years into a period of profound growth and contribution. Our guest, Richard Leider, is a luminary in the field of purposeful living and aging. He is a best-selling author, having penned numerous books, challenging and inspiring us to live life more fully, including his latest book, Who Do We Want to Be When We Grow Old? The Path of Purposeful Aging. Richard's approach was deeply influenced by his encounters with influential thinkers like Viktor Frankl and Abraham Maslow. He invites us to consider that growing and giving are key to vital aging. With a career delivering keynotes, coaching leaders, and authoring 11 transformative books, including 3 bestsellers, Richard's insights have touched lives worldwide. His influence extends through his PBS Special, The Power of Purpose, and as founder of Inventure, the Purpose Company. Richard has guided countless individuals and organizations, including AARP and the Mayo Clinic, towards finding their purpose. Recognized by Forbes among the top coaches globally, Richard also leads Inventure Expedition safaris in Tanzania, reflecting his deep commitment to purpose beyond borders. Dr. Izzo credits his time with Richard in Tanzania as an inspiration for his book, The 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die. Richard shares his profound insights on how we can continue to cultivate a sense of purpose and vitality, both in our inner and outer worlds as we age. We explore the pivotal choice points and how we can support others in their journey towards a purposeful elderhood. Also, we discuss the critical role health plays in this journey, reminding us that our well-being is tightly linked to our ability to live meaningfully. Join us as we explore the art of aging with purpose and the choices that lead to a more fulfilled and impactful elderhood. And now for our hosts, Dr. John Izzo and Alain Gauthier.
Hi, I'm Dr. John Izzo, and on behalf of my co-host, Alain Gauthier, I want to welcome you to this episode of the Way Forward Regenerative Conversations podcast, where we explore issues and ideas of interest in the future of humanity and planet and in our personal lives from an elder perspective. So first of all, thank you for joining us. Alain, I'm very excited about our conversation today. Not only the guest, who's an old friend of mine, but he's old and a friend, but mostly an old friend, goes back a long way. So I'm excited that Richard is joining us. But the subject to me is very important as we age, which is how do we continue to keep that sense of purpose and vitality in the inner and outer world as we age? And I couldn't help think of a couple of things. First, I think of my mother, who had a very vital life. Then her husband died, and when she was in her early 60s, then she retired around 66 or 67 and wound up living by herself, and work had been a very important part of her life. And then she just started cocooning. She really was never able to find that sense of purpose again. And I watched with a lot of pain, actually, as someone who coaches other people. We can't everyone coach the people closest to us, as her world became smaller and smaller. Till I feel when she finally died, some 13 years later, her life had probably been as small as it had ever been. And it felt to me like such a great tragedy. And of course, I have many friends in their 90s whose world is as large as it was when they were in their 20s, even if it's different. And that second piece, so first, how do we keep enlarging and leaning into purpose even as we age? And what are those maybe moments and choice points where we may lose that thread? And how can we help others? If you're not in that elder phase of life today, but have someone you care about in your life, this is a great episode for you, because you can be a coach and friend and mentor to them. But the second piece, as all of you on the call know, but not the listeners, I've been going through some significant health issues myself over the over the last year. And in fact, I'm on a catheter now through my abdomen. I've been on for a little while, waiting some surgeries. And when you were young, your grandparents said, if you have your health, you have everything. And it's not until we start to deal with these health issues that we start to realize how much, as we get older, health becomes a central part of the conversation, how we remain vital and have purpose. So with all of that along, I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today about how to have purposeful lives as we age. What are the choice points and ways we can deepen that? And how does health and the challenges of health come into that conversation?
Thank you, John. I'm very excited too. I'm 84 and I had a major health hiccup 10 years ago. And that was a point for me in which I tried to redefine what life was about, what I was about myself. So, Richard, it's going to be a pleasure talking to you about this.
So, Richard, welcome into the Way Forward podcast studio.
Yeah, thank you. I've been really looking forward to this.
And Richard and I do go back a ways. We happen both to have published a number of our books at Barrett Kohler, the great publisher out of San Francisco. And Richard is one of those people, if I started going through his books, the podcast would be over. Benjamin Franklin said, some men have a book in them, some have a library. And Richard has a library in him, from his first book on adventuring, which is still in publication and out there, though it was done in the 1970s, to his latest book, Who Do You Want to Be? A Guide to Purposeful Aging. Who do you want to be when you're old? So, Richard, welcome. Great to be here. And you've written a lot about purpose over the years. If there was a thread, in recent years, you've talked more and more about elderhood. But earlier in your iteration, purpose was the kind of, at least the sun around which your work orbited. And we're just curious, what lit a fire for you, if you can identify it, to make purpose your life's work?
Well, thank you for the privilege of being on this program. I've been studying purpose for 50 plus years, since dinosaurs roamed the earth. What triggered it or lit the fire were several things that I think your listeners can relate to. The first was fortuitous encounters with people who lit the fire in me or helped light the fire. Two, and that I'll mention. One was Viktor Frankl. In 1968, I spent a week with Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and many people will raise their hands and say they've read the book or that it's one of the most important books. I spent a week with him, and it was what I call a fortuitous encounter, John. It was a life-changing experience. And I was just getting out of graduate school in counseling psychology with advanced degrees in counseling, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. You'd think you'd figure that out in graduate school, but the fact is it's always about something else or somebody else. So I spent the weekend, you could hear a pin drop for 5 straight days. And I said, this information is not out there. I studied it in school. I studied him in school, but most people don't understand why purpose is fundamental to health, fundamental to healing, fundamental to happiness, fundamental ultimately to longevity. And I'm not as clear, I wasn't as clear then, but I was clear enough to say, this is what I want to do. And then I met Abraham Maslow just the year before he died. And many people talk about the Maslow hierarchy, but what they don't understand is just before Maslow died, Frankl and Maslow were communicating with and connecting with each other, and Maslow's hierarchy ended at the wrong place. It ended with self-actualization, but ultimately, just before he died, and it's in his latest work from his wife, it is that self-transcendence or purpose is fundamental to self-actualization. So I had those two things. And then the third thing I would say, just to belabor the point, if you will, was it was during the Vietnam War era, and I was trying to figure out, because I had a family and I had to figure out, and I got into an Army Reserve unit, a psychological operations reserve unit, which kept me out of Vietnam, but kept me working. And I had a side hustle, as they call it now, called Lunch Hour Limited. I was working as a chief HR officer at first General Mills and then First Bank. But I had a side hustle called Lunch Hour Limited. You buy me lunch, I coach you. And my side hustle had so many people signed up for it. And I found out that they were the people who shouldn't have signed up. The people who really needed it were not the people who signed up. The people who really wanted to evolve and grow and develop were the people who signed up. So Lunch Hour Limited was a big success. And I decided that this is what I needed to do for the rest of my, or not the rest of my life, but the next phase of my life. And so those three things, the Frankl, Maslow, and Lunch Hour Limited. And then finally, to just cap it off, I got a fellowship, a Bush Fellowship, to study at the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which now is, of course, all over the place. But back in 1973, when I had a fellowship and I spent a year in Boston going through the research on what makes people happy, et cetera. So those four things, I mean, think of how lucky I was, John, to have those kind of connections with different people who then, it wasn't like I was totally clear because I still had to make a living, but I mortgaged my house. I did different things to create my own practice, which is called Inventure, not Adventure, the Purpose Company. So thanks for asking the question. That's a long-winded answer.
No, it's great. And a couple of things popped for me. One is so often they say about teenagers that the 5 people they hang out with the most when they're teenagers have as much impact on their early adulthood as their parents. And I think whatever age we are, who we hang out with matters, right?
It does.
And so I love that you had this opportunity early in your life to have these experiences with people like Frankl and Maslow. But I have to ask you because I adore Viktor Frankl and his work and never had the privilege of being and those of you who haven't read his book, Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, read it. And he was a student of Sigmund Freud's and a psychiatrist who was interned at Auschwitz. And I won't ruin the story for you, but read the book. But Drew, what was your impression of Viktor Frankl? Like, if you could say, just as a presence, what anything stands out? Because many people read his work, but few have ever had the opportunity to be in his presence for 5 days. Anything stood out for you?
Well, he says the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want the next moment or your life to be about, regardless of the adversity that you're in. And so as coaches and counselors and people who are talking about aging now, the choices we make, oh, yeah, but what about this? What about health? What about money? And so it gets back to the fact that between what I remember the most, among many things, John, we could go into long-winded conversation about this, but between stimulus and response, between what is stimulating you negatively or positively, is choice, the freedom that we have as human beings to choose how we're going to act in the situation. So he would talk about in the concentration camp, giving a crust of bread, a slurp of soup, hope, a hug to others. And he said that doesn't guarantee that you would survive that experience, but the chances were higher if you did do that than not. And then he came out of that. He was liberated from Auschwitz. He weighed, after 3.5 years, he was in several concentration camps. He weighed 87 pounds, 87. And he's a big man. And he went back to Vienna, where he was, as you said, working with Sigmund Freud and Adler and Jung and others. And he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. That book, Man's Search in 9 days. But then he went on to do lectures. His lectures just came out about 1.5 years ago in a book called Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. So what I learned from him is to say yes to life in spite of everything. And you can roll your eyes on that, but that is human. That is in our psyche as human, in our DNA as human beings.
Roll your eyes, then lean into it, I would say.
Yeah. No one knows that better than you, John. I mean, you and I have had these conversations and we've interviewed elders and we're looking now at our own elderhood, et cetera. And are we saying yes to life in spite of our health challenges? Are we, all three of us have had these health challenges, and I've just come through one myself, and relearning to say yes to life we can talk about.
Yeah. Thank you. Beautiful. What you said, I'm aware of in some teaching, there's the practice of cultivating conscious contentment, which is a bit the same direction as you are. So you say you've already hinted at it, but what does purposeful aging mean to you? And why is it an important concept, a way of life?
Well, first of all, I want to suggest or propose that purpose is not a luxury. Purpose is fundamental to health, healing, happiness, and longevity. I did a PBS special in the US a couple of years back, and it was shown in 400 cities across the country. And part of the PBS process, they sent me out to neuroscience labs across the country. And one of those neuroscientists held up this pill and he said, Richard, see this pill? It will improve the quality of life in spite of Alzheimer's. It will reduce macroscopic stroke by 41%. It will help with sleep apnea and add 7.5 to 10 years to your life. I'm sitting with an eminent scientist at Johns Hopkins University. And he said, would you buy that? And I went, well, I mean, of course I'd buy it, but is it available and what would it cost? And he says, it's free. We now know that mindset about aging and about all of this, it's not going to cure it, but it's going to affect it in these ways. So the surprising science of purpose and having a reason to get up in the morning beyond yourself, beyond your own goals or your own self-interest is kind of a big deal. So the surprising science, just recently, I taught a program with Elizabeth Blackburn. She won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in, I think it was 2009. And she won can you imagine winning the Nobel Prize for Medicine as a female doctor in 2009? She won it because of the telomere effect. And what she learned was that purpose affects the telomeres, which are on the end of every one of your chromosomes in your body. If those telomeres grow and increase, you get better and you live longer. If those telomeres shrink, so that's just one example. But I learned doing the PBS special and looking at the surprising science at many levels now. I've had the privilege of doing this, that this is a fundamental thing. This is no luxury.
And when you were saying that, Richard, a couple of things that popped into my mind. One is, as we age, we often go through chapters of our life. And one of the things I think it'd be fun to explore, maybe those key moments as we age that maybe serve up the need to reimagine ourselves. But I'm curious I could guess, but a lot of your work in recent years has focused on purposeful aging. So from the more global to and is that just because you've gotten older, like all of us, or what really kind of lit a fire for you around this purpose as we age, as an increasing focus for you?
Well, I mean, I think as I've learned about it, one of the things I found was something, and I was involved in it, and I think you both know about it, called the U curve of happiness. So I was involved in this. I mean, that book that Jonathan Roche wrote about this, but this dip in midlife of where people seem to be more. I used to be called an expert in midlife crisis. Well, the midlife dip is something because we didn't live this long in the past. So part of it is sheer demographics that in 1900, the average life expectancy was 47 years old. And now it's, the fastest growing cohort in the US and other places in the Western world is 85 and over. And so all of a sudden, we've added 30 years to life. So I was hired by AARP in Washington, D.C., in the U.S., with 40 million members to create their lab on the future of aging. It was called the Life Reimagined Institute. I was the creator of that. And I got a chance to work with, study with, interview on their nickel, not only physical scientists, but psychological and philosophical people about aging. And I just was blown away about this new phase of life and how little was out there about the new phase of life. So I co-authored a book called Life Reimagined, Discovering Your New Life Phase. And out of that, I got connected with people all over the world about this whole business of aging. And as I was aging myself, I was an experiment of one, as you are, both are. So we could look at ourselves, we could look at really the data out there. And I became really fascinated with and curious about aging.
One of my mentors, Trudy Sopp, used to say, we teach what we most need to learn. It's no mistake that Viktor Frankl wrote about how to find purpose and choice, even in the difficulties of life, given what he went through, right?
And the other thing is that I just want to put this in at some point here, and that is that one of the things, there are two big breakthroughs I had when I was at AARP doing this for 5 years. Number one was that it's not about finding purpose, because we did language studies and we talked with thousands of people, really, I'll say hundreds, but many people, about their view of aging. And they hated words like reinvent yourself. They said, my life has not been a tragedy, but I do need to reimagine or look at what are the possibilities in a longer life. We're adding 3 decades to life. My parents, as you said, died, or your mother went through the process earlier, et cetera. And so I learned a lot about two things. Number one is that purpose is ultimately about 2 words: grow and give. If I had to summarize my life's legacy, my life's work, it's learn to grow and give from cradle to grave. And how to do that's the whole thing that we're talking about here. And secondly, purpose is a verb. It's not just something that you hang on the wall. It's something that is you do every day. So the big breakthrough is between purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. So when I give talks now, and I talk minute one or first about purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p, there's a big sigh in the room. Oh, thank God I don't have to found a foundation or be famous or do something beyond my ordinary life. So big P purpose is kind of that big P. Why am I here? Purpose with a little p, though, is what do I do tomorrow morning and the next morning and the next morning and the next morning? And there are 1,440 purpose moments in a day. And you have, like Frankl, had 1,440 purpose moments, even in the concentration camp, although he didn't use that term. And so I look at that as choices that we can make about our life. Even if we don't have the big P, the little p will ultimately end up being the big P. Does that make sense? The big P, little P?
Yeah, it does. And it made me think that you had said when you did the lunch events, right, that the wrong people showed up. Let's pretend for a moment there are some people listening today who are aging and they feel like they've lost that sense of purpose, maybe the big and the small P, or maybe it's just the big one, or maybe it's just the small one. What practical advice would you give them to begin that journey? So let's assume for the moment that someone is maybe at that end of the spectrum, and then we can talk about someone who might be more like, well, I could like I got it, but I want to fine tune it. And if there are stories of someone you've seen do that, even better. But what's your sense of how one begins if one is in that place right now?
Great question. And there's no silver bullet. There's no, just do this and you'll be fulfilled or happy or purposeful. However, there is a recipe, and I call it the napkin test. And it came out of Lunch Hour Limited. The napkin test is when people said to me, they still do this today. They probably do it to the two of you. Got a minute? Can you tell me what I should do with the rest of my life? And I said, well, if you've got a minute, take a napkin out and write this down. And what I would advise them to write down, which I still do to this day, is this recipe: gifts plus passions plus values equals calling, equals purpose. What are your most loved, enjoyed gifts that you have? What are your passions, your curiosities, the things that get you up or keep you up? And what are your values? When you put that formula together, which doesn't just come together like that often, but sometimes it does, that's kind of the recipe. An example of this, going back a little bit to the big P, little p, is a man named Ed Rapp. Ed was, when I was coaching him and working with him and doing programs like you do, a caterpillar that, the big company, US company. And he was number 3 in the company, and he was about to be named number 1, the CEO worldwide in Caterpillar. And he was coming back from a trip in Singapore where he was the president of they have 3 divisions. He was the president of one of the divisions. He was coming back and he was out for a run with his beloved son, Jay. His name is Ed Rapp, R-A-P-P. And his foot was dragging. And his son said, well, you must be really tired after this. Make a long story short, he was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic with ALS. He immediately had to resign, or he did resign from being in the queue to be the next CEO of Caterpillar. He went back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he is living now, and he has ALS. And it's a 3 to 5 year sentence. He's in his 6th or 7th year right now, and I talk with him and write about him and speak with him regularly. And he decided that he was not going to just give into it, although there's no cure for it. So he created the big P. He created something called Live Strong versus ALS, which is a foundation that he created, which today has raised $17 million for ALS research and growing. And you can go online, Live Strong versus ALS, and find that. Somebody could. And secondly, though, the thing that I'm bringing up here is a little P. So that was his big P. His little P was is to this moment, every single morning during the week, he gets up and coaches somebody at 8 o'clock in the morning who was just diagnosed with ALS. Somebody he'll never meet, could be a young person, a middle life, or older. And he finds that his own protocols and what he's learned and what he can give gives him life. He says, don't pity me for the good life. This is the good life, that I get up and help others. And so he's a very spiritual guy who's got a very strong physical practice as well as medical practice as well as spiritual practice. But he said, this keeps me going and keeps me alive. So it's kind of like a Viktor Frankl thing in some small way. And the point here is purpose is always beyond yourself. It's not just about a goal. And I can give you a younger version of this if you'd like as well, but that's enough probably. Ed Rapp is when I share that story, there are tears in the audience of people who say, it's me or my parents or somebody in my life who's struggling with this. And when they get beyond themselves to actually give to others, somehow they get better. It doesn't cure it, but they get better.
Isn't it true, Richard, that sometimes our pain point is the very portal into where we can give the most? We had recently had on Elliot Kotek, a documentary filmmaker who did a great film on purpose recently. Yeah. And so many of the people he featured had gone through a personal crisis, but that crisis became the portal for them to channel their giving energy. And it really reimagined, in your word, their whole lives.
No, absolutely. That when I've interviewed, as you have, many elders over the age of 60 or 65 and looked at their lives, that what really triggered some sense of purpose was a breakdown, a crisis. Breakdowns can create breakthroughs. They don't always do that, but they can do that. So when I said, how come you were never more reflective in your life? I was too busy. Even earlier in life, before cell phones and before technology, people were just as busy back then. And so in different, maybe similar, but somewhat different ways. And so I think crises, we can learn from them, but why wait for that?
That was a beautiful story that you shared with us, Ed Rapp. And we were wondering, are there some specific challenges? You already hinted at some of them. Challenges, obstacles that people face in discovering their own sense of purpose as they grow older. And how can they overcome these challenges?
That's a great question. Kind of the silver bullet answer, I would say, is this. Isolation is fatal. Going it alone is an incredibly bad idea. I was in Denver recently giving a talk at what's called the Noble Institute of Aging at Denver University. Noble is K-N-E-I-B-E-L or something. But so I get to Denver Airport. I live in Minneapolis, so it's an hour and a half. And and I find my way to an Uber, and I get into the Uber, and the driver says, "Where are you going?" And I say, "I'm going to the Moxie Hotel." She said, "The Moxie? That's only young people." And I said, "Well, that's where they put me up. So I'm going to the Moxie Hotel. What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "I'm going to talk about the path of purposeful aging. Who do you want to be when you grow old?" And he turns to the rearview mirror, and he turns it, and he looks at me in the back, sitting in the back. He said, "You know how old I am?" And I said, "Well, it's not a good idea to say either you're younger or older." So I said, "No, I don't." He said, "I'm 81. And I said, "Wow, you're 81 and you're an Uber driver." I said, why are you doing this?" And he went on to his story all the way to the Moxie Hotel. He said, "I retired and I was totally bored. I was sitting around drinking too much and watching TV, et cetera. And my wife was sick and then she died. So between my retirement situation and my wife dying, I was really lost. I was really not doing well. And I decided I had to get out of here and do something." And he said, "I'm an extrovert. I needed to meet with people. And so I decided I'd be an Uber driver." And he said, "I can meet people like you." And so we had this conversation. I said, "What's the bottom line here? Why do you get up every day and come to the airport early in the morning and pick up like me?" And he said to me, "Richard, isolation is fatal. Being alone is an incredibly bad idea. I didn't know how to meet people. I didn't know how to get out. And I decided this is one way to do it." And so I think that one of the things that we know from even the current Surgeon General in the US, Vivek Murthy, who wrote a book called Together, that isolation it's not just about being at the end of the hall in the nursing home or about being alone. It's about you could be and your listeners right now could be in a group of people and feel isolated. So it's about feeling that someone else gets me, that I get them, that I have a connectivity and some sort of curiosity that can blossom outside of myself.
Now, as I was listening to you, Rich, true what he said about isolation does that to us. And I saw that with my mother. And you made an interesting point for many people.
Yeah, you said she all of a sudden really lost her whole
Well,
context.
you had and I think what's interesting transition for many people is if you've worked full time most of your life, a lot of your meaning came from good and bad from your work, whether it was your calling or not. You got and she got lots of meaning from the interaction she had and being able to add value at work. And then when her husband died, and of course I'm older, didn't really need me day to day. But I feel like the isolation and sometimes I think what happens too is we don't have the kind of deep conversations with each other that we need. We have surface conversations. And I think it's so important that people, as they get to this phase of life, to have genuine conversations about the experience of isolation, the experience of loss of meaning with their older friends and younger friends. Because if isolation kills, also just holding it in instead of letting it out. Like I could imagine if my mother had even just been with a group of other older people struggling with that, they might have helped themselves find their way out of it.
Well, and I'm John, I'm not isolated, and I'm not bragging about all my friends or anything like that. But one of the things that really grabs me is when people say this: "Richard, you're 80 and you're still writing, you're still working, you're still doing these things." And I said, "Well, who gets to define still? I mean, still is like, why would I give up something I love to do so much and that I'm pretty good at? And well, can't you retire?" And I said, "Why would I want to do that?" So I think who I hang out with, who you both hang out with, it's not about isolation in the classic sense of being alone. It's the loneliness. It's a certain sense that these people I don't really want to go to dinner with people who are just talking about their travels and their grandparents. What are they curious about? What keeps them up at night in a positive way, et cetera? And I think so. I ask people to write down on 2 index cards the answer to 2 questions. On the first index card, what gets you up in the morning? Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you arise? And write down as many things that come to us. And second on index card, what keeps you up at night in a positive, curious way that you really want to learn about or grow hang out with other people. And when people do this, it can be a breakthrough.
So, Richard, we have some younger people in our audience, and we're wondering what advice you would give to younger individuals who want to start preparing for a purposeful or fulfilling old age, or help someone in their family, in their neighborhood that is going through that phase.
Yeah. Well, that's a really big and important question. First of all, is to find a mentor, and as opposed to a mentor. You know the concept of mentor? Chip Connolly actually coined the term mentor, but it's being a mentor and somebody who's a learner. So a mentor is an intern and a learner and somebody. So oftentimes we think, well, now we're a certain age, I should be a mentor, I should have the wisdom, etc., which is partially true, but also being curious. And I think one of the key ingredients of purposeful aging is curiosity, is being curious. And I don't know if you've ever had Richard Warman, the founder of TED, on your show, but the founder of TED said that he founded TED back in the 80s because he's an architect and an urban planner. He was curious about technology, the intersection of technology, entertainment, and design, TED. And he would have these ultimate dinner parties where he would invite people from technology, entertainment, and design, and he would listen to the way they talked. And out of that, he said, this should get to more people, and TED was created. And so I think, who are the people that you hang out with that are in that ultimate, who would be your ultimate dinner party? I suggested that and did that during the pandemic. And it was a breakthrough for a lot of people that they could be Zooming, even though they weren't in the same room having dinner together, but the different people having dinner together. What were they curious about? What kept them up? So I think back to youth, first of all, is a mentor type. Find one, maybe ultimately be one. Second thing is, I talked earlier about the recipe for purpose. And the one thing I do and would do continually is get that recipe in the hands of millennials and younger people to figure out their gifts, passions, and values, because they're going to have to redo that over and over and over in their lifetime. I grew up like I think you did, John. My father worked for the same place for 40 years, retired, 2 years later, dead. That was during an era when that was, we could go into that, but the fact is, how many people do you know who are younger who are going to work for the same place for 40 years and retire? The answer is zero.
And from that perspective, since times have changed, how do you see the concept of purposeful aging evolving in the future, given the societal changes that we're going through?
Well, I think ageism is alive and well. There's a lot of science coming out right now that's changing that people are starting to really realize that. I talk in simple terms about money, the 3 M's. I live where 3M company is, not too far from here, but that's not what this is about. Money, medicine, and meaning. So you need enough money to retire, for sure. You need enough medicine, or that's health, not just pharmaceuticals. But you also need meaning. I think both of you know people who have enough, I would say, money and medicine or health, but are bored or are not doing well, or you don't want to hang out with them. And there's other people who might have meaning, but not health and are doing okay, or not enough money. So the key is all three. So I think we need to, I'm a senior fellow academic at a university. I'm an education fellow for the Alliance of Lifetime Income in Washington, D.C. that's about money. We need all three: money, medicine, and meaning. And the first two without the third is a whole education for, ageism or anti-ageism, or I'll say pro-aging as opposed to anti-aging.
Richard, we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast this issue of health. You mentioned now medicine, and medicine is bigger than health. And we have some guests staying with us in Palm Springs this week who are some old friends of mine, old both physically and for 40 years. And they were joking that in their, like, one of their cohorts of friends, they have a 15-minute rule, which is when they get together, you can only spend the first 15 minutes talking about all the various physical things that are going on. Then you need to move on. To which, by the way, my team member Ainsley said, well, my parents are like in their late 80s. They spend the first 15 minutes talking about who died since the last time they've been together. But a question is really, and here, get personal if you want. I know you and I and Alon have both had some health challenges in the last few years.
Yeah.
How do we stay spiritually, emotionally, psychologically vital as we are dealing with the inevitable health challenges? And again, be personal if you'd like. But what are some secrets? Because again, if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that will begin to happen. Coming to a theater near you.
You know, I having just gone through a health challenge and surgery a couple of months ago myself, and 5 months leading up to that, I found, because I'm on contract to complete the 4th edition of my book, my perennial best-selling book, The Power of Purpose. But I'll tell you, John, to your question, in the last 5 months, or I'll say a little bit before, I wasn't reading, I wasn't writing, I was self-absorbed with my challenge. And it was, not painful every day, but it was discomforting most of the time. And I was, grabbed and pulled off center. And so I think one of the things that I have learned about, whether it's depression or health or other things, is that purpose is an antidote to isolation and to these health challenges, to do something for others, even though you don't feel like it. It's like the concentration camp with Viktor Frankl. All of a sudden made perfect sense to me. Before that, it was a concept, and all of a sudden it was like a felt sense. So purpose is a felt sense where we do something for others beyond ourselves. And, it's 1,440 purpose moments in a day. It could be just a kind word, an email, listening. Doesn't have to be any big thing, but I felt better. Like Ed Rapp, when he gets up in the morning and does coaching, even though he's on crutches and he's on this, he's so alive and so vital when you talk to him that you think, I want that in certain ways. So I think back to the question of aging, it's a hard message to get across, that it's beyond yourself. And one of the people that, I don't think we have time for this story, but Terry Fox, I dedicated The Power of Purpose to. As you well know, in Canada, Terry Fox is an icon. But I saw Terry Fox on the last day of his run, before he had to quit his run across Canada to raise $1 million for the Canadian Cancer Society. I saw him just outside of Thunder Bay, and it changed my life when I saw him. And I saw that and went back and then reconnected with him, with his family and him later. But, the Terry Fox organization, our Terry Fox Fund, is $850 million. Terry Fox runs, Terry Fox bookstores, So the point is, it was not about, it's a distinction between a goal and a purpose. And a purpose is giving beyond yourself. A goal is something that gets you there, perhaps. But so we could go on to that. But I think as we look at this whole concept of aging, we have to look at it as something that is throughout history. You and I, John, have sat around the fire with elders in Africa. Throughout history, we have learned that elders give and elders grow and give. And so my basic message is, and the subtitle of my new fourth edition is Grow and Give for Life. That's the bottom line of this whole message for me.
And, to your point, Richard, I think one of the things that can happen when we go through health challenges is we turn inward. We become, you said, I was self-absorbed, and totally. I felt that. And in my recent hospital stay at Cedars-Sinai, I'll put it out there, great hospital in Los Angeles. One of the things that happened for me is I was surrounded, because I was in an observation ward for about 36 hours. So there wasn't a private room. I had like all these people going through all kinds of stuff. And just being helpful to those people, many of whom were going through more difficult things than I was, gave me tremendous meaning. And it got me out of the focus on the self. And so I got to live that myself. And the guys on each side of me, one guy had chronic back pain for like 25 years, like debilitating back, had like 15 or 18 surgeries. And the other guy had a similar problem to me. And there's another woman with cancer. But I found by focusing outward, not on the small self. Now, still didn't mean it wasn't difficult, right? But that was a turning for me. So I experienced that in real time in my recent hospital stay.
And I find when I go out today to do a talk or an event for a nonprofit that I believe in, they may pay for my expenses to get there or not at all. But I find myself much more alive than all the work I've done over decades with organizations, et cetera, because I just feel like it's really me and it's really important.
And Richard, in the elder regenerative process, that is a program we have underway, which includes a number of people. We talk about the intergenerational collaboration that can take place. And from that perspective, and you've already pointed to the role of mentor, but in what ways can elders serve as mentors and guides for younger generations, both within families, but also in a broader community?
Well, I go back there to Carl Jung, who said the greatest damage you can do to your kids is your own unlived life. Greatest damage you can do to your kids is your own life. So the starting point, I think, is, are you not trying to be a model, but you just are yourself, authentically being yourself, giving, growing and giving, I would say. And that's what they really learn from, is how you're living, because you can preach all you want, but what they'll really see is, and get, I think, is that action. Purpose is a verb. It's action. And action precedes clarity. What people see is action. And that's how I would, in a simple way, say that.
Beautiful.
There's nothing more vital, I think, for a younger person to see an older person who is becoming more gracious, more open, more curious, more alive, more giving. And as you said,
authentically, not trying to be the model. It's just that this is who I've become, and I'm going to be that, as opposed to not be that. So the whole notion of don't grow old, grow whole. Growing whole means to be authentically who yourself at all levels, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, in the way you can.
And, if you're in the middle of your life or even younger, I've always often said about that aging is like drinking. Drinking makes angry people more angry. It makes fun people more fun. It makes gracious people more gracious, right? It makes selfish people more selfish. Yep. And I feel aging is kind of that way. So I feel sometimes in the middle of our life, we ought to know we're preparing now for the kind of older person that we're going to be. If we're focused on purpose, if we're focused on giving, if we train our mind not to back to external stimuli, back to Viktor Frankl, to realize that I have a choice to be content and happy in each moment and to lean into the moment and open my heart. And so it seems to me, Richard, we're always in training to be older, because we all can say, because we're in that category, that the game doesn't get easier. So to use the sports analogy, you'll still be in the game. It's a tougher game, right? Physically, mentally. So you better prepare. And the way you prepare is to cultivate these things long before you come to that moment of aging.
That's right, John. And I love what the American essayist E.B. White said about this. He said, I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Well, I think in due respect to him, it makes it easier to save. Save does not literally mean save the world, but it means to give and to get, to savor. And if life's all about savoring, we know plenty of people who are like that. We call them serial narcissists. And if it's all about saving, we call them do-gooders. And so the blend of living in community, living a longer life is about saving and savoring. And I think it makes it easier to handle. And that's why I came down to growing and giving as kind of the essential, fundamental purpose in a nutshell.
And on a personal note, Richard, and you've already alluded to it, and that's a question we ask from every one of our guests. How do you personally try to live regenerative life?
Well, humbly speaking, I hope, I try to make a difference in one person's life every day, unsolicited. It's kind of the grow and give 1,440 moments. When I did the PBS Special, I had people or asked people to take a Post-it and a little Post-it and write grow and give and put it on their mirror. And in the next 5 days, when you get up in the morning, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give? And at the end of the day, before you went to bed, how did I grow and give? And I found people had breakthroughs all the time, that this intentionality, this mindset, as simple as it sounded, actually there was a felt sense. They felt better, regardless of their situation. It wasn't a miracle or anything like that. To this day, years later, I still get people who say, I still have that stupid Post-it on my mirror because it works. And so for me, I don't need the Post-it on my mirror anymore, but I do need the intentionality every day to say, today, how am I going to grow and give in spite of not getting paid to do it or not having been on a podcast to do it? It's like I could be at the local gas station. I could be at the local store, et cetera, and come across somebody who looks like they could say, how are you doing today? Something simple. So training the mind to be intentional about growing and giving has been my practice, one of my practices. And so making a difference in one person's life every day is the way I keep score.
Yeah, one of the things I always tell people, Richard, is habit is destiny. And so what I love about that, like a simple habit of having that intention every day. And just curious, before we close out, any other habits that you have in your own life that you think just help keep you vital? I know you've got something called the golden hour.
Well, the golden hour for me is every morning when I wake up, which is early. I go to bed early and I get up early. And every day, early in the morning, I'll make a good cup of coffee and I'll write. I'll read and write for at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And you remember the story of William Stafford, the poet, who wrote a poem a day for 30 years. And I actually interviewed him. And I said, how did you do this? He said, simple, lower your expectations. So I don't get up every day to write a bestseller or to write, but I get up because I'm curious about what we're talking about right here. Tomorrow morning, I'll probably write about this, what we just talked about in certain ways, and my insights from what I've learned from talking to the two of you. So there's the golden hour type of thing that is a practice. And the other thing is breathing. I take pretty good care of myself, but 3 deep breaths just before we start here. 3 deep breaths without just being grabbed by the emotion of the moment. I'm not great at it, but I'm getting better at it to really say, how can I stay present in this situation and not be just an assessment or self-absorbed. So 3 deep breaths and breathing and learning. The whole practice of centering is something that I've practiced and I've learned from other people like Richard Heckler, who's an Aikido master, and others who I've had a chance to learn a little bit about the body from.
Yeah, those simple habits can, recently I had kind of stopped reading very much, which is an important part of growth, because reading is you have to sit down and read the book. And so a friend of mine said, well, just use Audible books, right? Because you exercise a lot, you hike, you're in the car. And so now I spend a good half hour every day reading through Audible books. So I'm literally growing every day, and it's become a really powerful habit for me. And that's the part of how I grow every day. But now it doesn't have to nuzzle out anything else that I'm doing.
Right. No, that's good. But I think just a final point on my side is making appointments with yourself is important. We're so busy making appointments with everybody else and being distracted by iPhones and everything. But I actually still keep a calendar like this, and I make appointments with myself. Sometimes if you called me and it said he's busy, like my assistant will say he's busy, they don't tell you it's an appointment. He says he has an appointment, but they didn't say it was an appointment with himself. So I honor that. I think it's important that we make appointments with ourselves.
Well, Richard, thanks so much. We could go on forever. In a moment, I'll give Alon a chance to make a closing word, then I'll close us out. But Richard, remind us of the name, because I don't want to get it wrong again, of that most recent book. Who do you want to be? Just remind, because I know people want to get out and get it.
Thank you. It's Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? The Path of Purposeful Aging.
Who do you want to be when you grow old?
And it's a beautiful little book, the way they designed it. It's a short read with pullouts, etc. And it has a thing at the end of the book about dying, which they said, dying doesn't sell. Wrong. It's not about dying in a morbid way. It's about legacy, about end of life. If you have the end in mind, it makes time today. I keep this on my desk. I use it this is look at that.
Eyeglass. Yeah.
Hourglass. Everybody's on the hourglass. So if you start to look at the hourglass and say what's important now, then you start to look at what really matters. And time becomes of the essence. The most precious currency we have is time, or lack of.
Thank you again. An honor as always, my friend.
I hope when the new book comes out, I can come back again for part 2.
You are welcome in the podcast anytime.
Okay. Thank you.
Ikasa isukasa. Go ahead, Alon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for the personal examples you gave, as well as some of the tips or the advice that I think many people will take to heart. So it was a great experience.
Yeah. For me too. Thank you.
Yeah. And in closing out for me, 2 things stand out what you said, Richard. One was asking 2 questions. What gets you up in the morning? What really gives you a spring in your step? Yesterday I had that experience where I was just on a call about something. And when I finished, I said, now, John, that would be worth getting up in the morning to do. So take those hints during the day. When you have something during the day, when you feel about it, that's a hint of what your deepest purpose is. The second thing that you said is, what keeps you up at night? Not in a bad way, but in a good way. What keeps you up about what do I need to get to? What would I love to get to? What bothers me about the world that I'd love to do something about? And the other thing was about grow and give, and putting that postcard out. And I couldn't help but think, when I was studying for the Presbyterian ministry, they had a little contest of which you could earn $250 if you could memorize the Westminster Shorter Catechism, which is this Calvinistic series of questions. And because I desperately needed the $250 when I was in seminary, I signed up for the contest. I do not remember anything. I won the contest, by the way, but I don't remember now anything about the Westminster Shorter Catechism except for the first question of the catechism. And you'll see why I thought of it. It said, what is the chief end of man? What is the chief end of a human? And the answer was to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I thought, what were they really saying? First of all, to make the creation better than when you arrived. Because how do you glorify God? He didn't need us to kiss his butt or kiss her butt. Yeah. You glorify God by making the creation even better. So every day you get up and say, how can I make the creation better? But the second part, and enjoy him forever. And what is him? If God is everything, what it was saying was enjoy the heck out of the experience, grow every day, lean into it, be in a sense of purpose. So anyway, thank you for reminding us of what I had to memorize a long time ago.
And I would just add that I am getting so many requests from faith-based organizations that are wanting to execute on or give practices for what you just talked about. And I call it the power of purpose. They might have other terms for it, but what they want are practices. What do I actually do to bring the catechism into my life?
Exactly. It's so good. By the way, I haven't done that very well in most of the mainline religions. Buddhism is better at that. We teach all this head knowledge, but what about the practices? It was there in the monastic tradition, but then we let it go. Right.
You said at the very beginning, we're only as good as our practices. We're always practicing something. Is it getting you what you want or what the world wants or not?
Well, finally, first of all, again, Richard, thank you. You've added value to my life over the years. My book, The 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die, where I went on and interviewed those elders, came sitting at the tribal fire with the Hadza folks in Tanzania. So, you've added so much value to my life. And finally, to you, our listeners, thank you. You're why we're here and why we come to serve. As we always say around here, if you love what you heard, please let us know and share it. If you like what you heard but think we could do better, we'd love to hear from you. And as we always like to say,
aging is a privilege, and it's been a real privilege for me to be with you. So thank you from my end.
Thank you, Richard. And as we always say when we end this podcast, history is not a destination waiting for us to arrive, either for society or for us individually. We are creating history right now by what we do today. So live a purposeful day, whatever age you are, and we'll see you next time. Way forward. Thanks again.
I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast, The Way Forward Regenerative Conversations. You have many choices, and we appreciate your interest and support. You can reach us at our email address, thewayforwardrc@gmail.com. Please share your thoughts and feedback with us. Only with your help can we make this a podcast you want to listen to and share with your friends. If you have guests you would like us to have a conversation with, please email us your recommendations. I would also like to thank our sponsor, Elders Action Network, who is building a movement of elders to address the environmental, governance, and social issues of our time. Their website is eldersaction.org. Until next time, I'm Jim Burke, and this is the Way Forward Regenerative Conversations podcast, which you can listen to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Amazon Music. In parting, may I wish you a regenerative present and future.